Kristallnacht. The pogrom of the Kristallnacht. Well, first of all, I'm sure you know what preceded that. There was this Jewish boy, the name of Gruenberg, whose parents had lived in Germany and were deported to Poland. He wanted to avenge his parents. Went to a German consulate in Paris and asked to see the consul. Instead, out came one of the secretaries and he shot him. The secretary died. Was a man, German. That preceded the so-called Kristallnacht. It began in our area in the early afternoon, November 9, 1939. 38. I heard terrible noises out there, and I went downstairs. Now, the street I lived in was a very small street. As a matter of fact, the smallest street in the entire area. 10 houses, 5 on each side. There were 5 pubs, incidentally, just to give you an idea of the milieu that I lived in. And one of them was the State Employment Office, where hundreds and hundreds of people came every day. And that's who the pubs made a living from, more or less. I went down the street, and there was terrible commotion going on in the Linienstrasse, which intersected our street on one side. So I went to the corner and saw a mob of civilians, Germans. They were breaking windows. They were throwing merchandise out on the street. They broke into Jewish apartments. I heard the screams of women, of children. Furniture was coming down from the windows. They threw them out the windows, including a piano. It came down. It sounded like a bomb. I didn't know what to do at that moment. I just looked at it. To the right of me was one of the menswear shops. There were about 4 of them in this little block there. There was one person on the ground. They stamped on him. They kicked him. And before I could even do anything, I suddenly heard, "Oh, there's another Jew." And they jumped on me and knocked me to the ground.
Who was they?
Germans. There were various groups of Germans. They were ransacking stores, breaking into apartments. It wasn't just one unit or one group, but various groups, a mob. Obviously stormtroopers, but in civilian uniform, and in civilian clothing. I was able to tear myself loose and quickly ran to a house, probably the fastest 50 meters I ever ran in my life, slammed the door behind me, locked it from the inside, ran up to our apartment. My mother and sister were aghast when they saw me. I said to them, "You got to get out of here quick. They could be here any minute." And so I told them what was happening outside. So I took my mother, my sister, and my precious bicycle up to the 5th floor, the attic of the house, and right next to the entrance door to the roof, just in case that we had to go up there. And that is where we stayed. We had a couple of blankets we took along. We settled down on the floor quietly, and we stayed there. And while we were there, excuse me, I suddenly smelled smoke. I didn't know where it was coming from. I thought it was coming from the chimney of a house. So I went on the roof and I looked around, and there was smoke coming from various buildings in the general area. But I didn't know it was that those were synagogues and little steeples, little prayers that were set on fire. I didn't know it then, including the one where I was bar mitzvah. I went down and told my mother and sister what I saw, and I said, we must stay here. We must stay here. And then, you know, whenever we heard steps coming up the staircase, our heart was beating fast, and we didn't know would it stop, would they come after us. And so we stayed there all night. Until next morning, when all was very quiet. And I said to my mother, I'm going to go down to our apartment and see if we're okay.